we are live streaming this. Only we are on video, as we just said. I mentioned we're taking questions from you guys in the audience, but also for you guys online. Hopefully they've gotten there. You've linked that.
I'm working on it. Wi-Fi's a little slow, but I'm almost there.
I'll come back around and I'll give them that address if they haven't found it. The back channel only has room for 30 people, so if you see us pause in the middle, it's because randomly there are more than 30 people trying to log in and there's been problems. So some ground rules for us as the panelists. When we are talking, be additive, not subtractive. So if you agree with something, say so, but then move to the next point. We don't need to hear in depth how everyone agrees and thinks exactly the same on something. So just make sure that you're contributing constructively to the conversation. Not everyone needs to answer every question, so we'll kind of bounce around. And if you have something that you think your voice would be really different or a really interesting perspective on something, feel free to jump in. But just keep in mind that I'm not expecting all of us to answer everything.
You need to speak up as well. We've already had one comment that you are hard to hear, Jan.
Okay, I'm hard to hear, so speak louder than me. Keep your answers crisp and concise. If you have a backstory, that's great, but this isn't the place for it. So share the backstory later, but try and keep our answers moving along so that we can get to a lot of questions. Keep it conversational. Like I said, if you have something that you think would really contribute, jump in. But that also means don't talk over someone. So kind of feel those pauses. Us as panelists, we need to be aware of our airtime, how much we are speaking, and how much we are allowing others to speak. So just everyone kind of be aware of that and make sure that we're all getting a chance to contribute to the conversation. And then one of my favorites is generate light, not heat. Let's have a healthy conversation and have it be constructive and useful, but let's not get into heated debates that are not constructive anymore. And for the audience, when we do Q&A stuff, state your question first and keep it so that we actually know what your question is. Who you want to answer that question. It can be a specific person or it can be just kind of to the panel who wants to answer it. And then if you need to give context for your question, go ahead and give just like a brief bit of context for it. For those of you who are live, I'm going to jump back around. If you haven't found it on the linked event or in the comment that Michael has hopefully made for you all, there is a back channel for the virtual folks so that we can take your questions. It's backchannelchat.com, and Michael's going to put the code in the comments for you so that you can jump right in. It just asks you for a name and the code for the back channel chat. It can be any name, we don't care, use whatever you want. So moving on from that, we're just going to do some introductions. I'll start since I've been the one talking, and then we'll go around. I'm Reverend Jan Avende. I go by she or they. I'm part of Three Cranes Grove ADF, which is part of nDraíocht Féin. We are a Druid organization that worships from any of the Indo-European pantheons. I'm a priest and an initiate within that path. And kind of our core beliefs are we honor the earth, we honor the spirits that they might give us blessings in return, and we are committed to public ritual. That's like our shtick as part of ADF. So that's me. I'm just going to start with Brian.
Yay!
And we'll just move across the line here.
My name is Brian Edwards. I am the high priest of a coven called Winding Road. I've been a practitioner of witchcraft for approximately 29 years. My coven is very diverse, and I'm actually particularly proud of that. Its tradition is Etruscan Dianic, which is Greco-Celtic in origin. Specifically, its focus is on understanding and cultivating the divine feminine and masculine in all individuals because we come from male and females. A lot of traditions I've studied over the years have pretty much ascribed certain attributes based off of sexual genitalia. This one actually requires balance from the understanding that you have aspects of both present. Within that faith, I am specifically a Hectite witch, and I worship the Lady Hecate. I have a prison ministry within the Department of Corrections, and I have been doing that for approximately 8 or 9 years. It's a real source of joy. I think I need to make the distinction that I am a priest who's also clergy, because there are lots of priestesses and priests out there in the world that are not actually clergy. And I really primarily focus in terms of my contributions to the world in helping individuals heal themselves and applying occult practices for rehabilitation purposes so that individuals go through a rebirthing. So that you see yourself from one end of the spectrum and then you find out yourself something else at the end. But that would be about it.
My name is James Vaca. I'm a priest with the Nemeton of the Ways. The Nemeton of the Ways is a group that's an interspiritual group that's dedicated to sacred sanctuary in all of its forms. We build and construct and maintain sacred sites throughout the area, as well as hosting public rituals that just embrace the concept of sanctuary. So we're not dedicated to a specific path or tradition in that sense. We're more open to just about anyone who's driving with basically earth-centered spiritualities, but also the concept of sacred sanctuary. In my personal practice, personal life, I'm an asatru. I worship the Norse pantheon, and I splash in Ganesha just for fun. So,
I'm Liturgist. I'm High Priestess of Griffin's Moon Coven, which is an eclectic Wiccan coven here in Columbus. We're a young coven, just getting started. We're not associated with any larger tradition. We're sort of homebrewing our own right now, building that out of a lot of different experience and out of a lot of different people's contributions coming together. A lot of my work personally is around teaching, and I also teach classes in Wicca and other forms of shamanic training, trance journey, other kinds of healing work, and magic in general.
Hi, I'm Grafton Swickard. I'm a co-founder of Griffin's Moon Coven with Liturgist, and recently promoted to High Priest of that coven. I am a priest of Bridget and Griffin in my personal practice. I've been following an eclectic Wiccan path for 35 odd years at this point, but I've recently become much more active in working with the community locally and with the coven to get it off the ground.
We teach that Wicca is a religion of relationship with the land base and the land spirits, relationship with the divine, relationship within oneself, and relationship with the beings around one. And we concentrate on all of those. Different people within our coven will choose different combinations of those to focus on. So we don't speak for everyone in the coven or for all Wiccans or anything like that, but we are happy to talk about our personal practice and also try to differentiate personal from coven, because that can be different too.
Thank you. I do have questions later that are based on, because I believe we are all part of a group practice, but then all have our own personal practice. So there'll be some questions kind of about that where we can explore that a little more. So my first question that I have for everyone, since this is a pagan theology panel, is should we as pagans discuss theology? Does that term apply to the work that we do? And if it doesn't, do you feel like there's a better term for that? So we'll go with Lit. Will you take the first jab at that?
Absolutely. I have annoyed several editors with playing with different spellings of theology. Walking in the footsteps of Isaac Bonowitz, one of the founders of ADF, he proposed that we should alter the word to be theology, study of many gods. because he was focused in a polytheistic approach. I'm also polytheistic, and for a while I played with, should it be theology? Is there a way that we can balance the masculine and feminine in there and explicitly include both? And there's just not an elegant way to say that. So should we be talking about theology? Should we be talking about the study of the gods? Well, you ask an intellectual, and I'm going to say yes. So yes, but I don't know if that's the best word for it. And Wicca, in particular, is much more of a religion of practice than belief. We talk about the difference between praxis and doxy, orthopraxis versus orthodoxy, and I know other folks talk about that as well. What are other folks' thoughts?
I think, if you don't mind me jumping in, I think that the discussion of theology and, from my standpoint, theocracy is particularly important, and mostly because many of the people that are guided to me for assistance, they've been injured by previous relationships with other organizations, and I, in general, feel like the subject of God becomes, or even goddess, becomes pretty touchy. Many people, after a real good scare in dealing with an organization that in some way has weaponized their relationship with their deity, are very gun shy about it. And typically when you find a magical practitioner that's like that, I liken it to being a throne that's on the inside of the person. And many of those individuals that have been wounded in that way find it that they put themselves on that throne. There's a real serious lack of trust in the idea of turning to something unseen and offering the entirety of your spirit to it again once it's been wounded from another place. And so discussions with regards to theology, theocracy, or whatever term or terminology you want to apply to it, I think are particularly important if you want to help an individual heal from that wound. And it's a really delicate, touchy subject in of itself when you go to approach it. But it's so worth it to introduce your thoughts and your feelings and how it works for you, as opposed to requesting an individual to adopt that dogma or the hierarchies of those dogmas. When you go to educate them about what it is that you do and allow them in their own time to adjust and to absorb it. I think it's an integral piece to healing individuals that leave a former faith and then find that they're becoming pagan in nature and then eventually move into one of these varying sects of magical practices.
Yeah, I like how you talked about it being good for on this individual level, but I think theology is also important on like an organizational level, because if we as pagans talk about theology, then when we enter interfaith situations, have this firm grounding in our own beliefs and are better able to articulate it to others who either have no idea what it is or are hostile or confused, whatever the other approach might be, but it gives us a way to ground our own beliefs for interfaith discussions. So we talked about theology. Now I want to see how we feel on the polytheist to monotheist spectrum. So I'm going to start with Grafton on this one.
Definitely well toward the polytheist end of things, and I'm not averse to mixing pantheons as long as there is an understanding that cultural appropriation is not good or appropriate and not happening. Borrowing from living cultures without becoming part of that culture does not happen. Should not happen. Happens all too often.
Is actively not part of our practice.
But very much there are multiple spirits, multiple deities that I work with personally, and that other people I know work with different and differently. So definitely to the polytheist end.
James?
So polytheism is something that I think describes almost anyone who walks a path that's similar to what we have. There's a lot of different variations, especially when you talk to people who are more on the shamanic or animistic side of things. Because I have encountered people who are very happy to explore their religion with you and are very happy to explore these things, but get a little put off when you start describing things in terms of gods, because their spiritual experience doesn't necessarily support an actual anthropomorphized figure in the way that we often consider gods to be. So polytheism is a great, so labels are useful things for us to have. As you were talking about with interfaith people, it's great to go to a place like that where you can willingly and consensually take a label and say, yep, that's me, so that other people can easily interact with you. So polytheism is a great label to have for those tools, or for those meetings, but it can sometimes carry its own drawbacks. And I think the other point I would make is that I think many of us in these traditions are open to ideas of like henotheism, where deities are all manifestations of a singular divine entity or divine consciousness, or the idea of where the universe itself is a deity that simply manifests in different ways. So one of the things that's great about paganism is that, as people have mentioned, the emphasis of orthodoxy is not as much as it is in other religions. Everyone gets to have their own interpretation.
What you said comes across in my language as a discussion about hard and soft polytheism is one way that's often described, and I like to joke that I'm silk and tofu polytheism. and on Sundays I thank God and Goddess and all the powers that there may be, that it doesn't matter what I believe as long as I'm building healthy relationships with the powers in and out of bodies, with the people that I'm in relationship with. So if they tell me that they're completely separate beings, it's only polite to behave as if they're completely separate beings, and at some point it gets to an angels on the head of a pin discussion. And I'm too busy. Brian's got people to minister to. I got classes to teach. We all got things to do. At some point that passes beyond a realm that I'm interested in. That's one of the ways I keep it anchored.
I do want to offer one statement to this, which is, if you choose and feel drawn to a god or a goddess, and you pray to it, and it responds to you, and you are not of a culture or a people that, according to writing, should have access to it, I think that trumps biology 1,000 times over. If Godhead wishes to speak to you, who is man to decide who or what it is that you can talk to or what speaks back? That I don't like, well, in my tradition and in my faith, and honestly, actually demonstrating what it means to be a devotee. I don't like the idea of my representing anything that hinders an individual from that development or in cultivating that relationship with the unseen. And I kind of liken a personal experience I have with someone. It really just kind of boils down to an individual being made to feel horrible because he, as a person who happens to be gypsy, was drawn very much to the practice of voodoo. And then the reactions of individuals based off of his draw to that as a particular practice. I just basically found myself in a position really where I saw how spirit responded to him during ritual, and that he very much could be inhabited by a mambo if that's what it was that was desired, and that he'd hollowed himself out to be a vessel for that. In the face of what is written in terms of documentation and that as a personal experience, I would think, and then witnessing it from an outside standpoint, I would think that would trump writing 1,000 times over than anything else that actually has been documented. That speaks to me more personally. So I kind of, again, in terms of repairing previous bad experiences with deity beforehand, that's a way of encouraging that.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
We in our style of teaching, we're trying to be conscious and humble of our own limitations in our coven.
Sure.
And so we're trying to balance valuing and encouraging people's connection with deity with harm done to living people and living cultures, and including awareness of power relationships and history relationships between different groups of people, and including both of those in your ethical considerations. And so Grafton was alluding to something where we will say, if you're interested in Buddhism, you're drawn to a Buddhist way of approaching that, I'm going to say, great, let's find you a Buddhist, because I'm not. That's my approach, and that's part of respecting living traditions.
Understood.
As opposed to, we're walking a fine line, because we're eclectic Wiccan, we're trying to say we're not Gardnerian, and we're not like, hey, I Googled the goddess on the internet, let's do ritual to her tonight. Okay, because we've seen a lot of those folks. And we try to engage a little bit more deeply, with a little bit more theology, if you will, with a little bit more study as part of building relationships there.
So I'm going to jump back to, Lynn, you made the comment that you have people to teach, and Brian has people to minister to. So if you practice regularly with a group, how do you incorporate your personal practice into that? And then kind of as a sidebar, if you want to answer it at the same time, if you are not part of a public tradition, how do people find you? Do you have seekers? Like, how do they move through those positions? So Brian, let's start with you.
Oh, God. Honestly, I didn't know I had a seeker, but apparently I do, because it's weird. I like the idea that we were an established group and we're growing. I rely primarily on sign and portents and the hand of deity and bringing individuals to me. I never really got out and was like, hey, we have a secret group, don't tell anybody about it. But it really kind of like became a thing where I started hearing that people were aware of us like we were Fight Club. And I just kind of was like, okay. Your question kind of really is germane to the name of my group, so I'd actually like to answer from this standpoint. Winding Road is called Winding Road because if you look at a spiral, if you were to literally look at a spiral, there are two roads that are present in the spiral. One is light and one is dark. And whether that road is descending to the deepest depths of the underworld or ascending to the highest boughs of the heavens, every single one of us, dependent upon the path, regardless of its name or its tradition, we're walking that. The organization in terms of my own personal practice, it is Etruscan Dianic in origin, yes. It does not turn away any individual who has a personal practice and wants to learn of my tradition, but also contribute what it is that it has learned. This, many times over, when I hear people say that's never gonna work, I'm always like, no, this is how new magic is born. And so how new magic is born, many times when we say, for example, we're having Samhain, I will pull out a whiteboard and I will write down what the goals of said ritual actually are. And then the voodoo person will offer what he feels is his contribution. Someone over here who is strictly Wiccan will offer what it is that they want to offer. The non-dogmatic witch over here will offer what it is that they offer. The ceremonial magician over in the corner will offer what it is that he feels that he wants to do. I very carefully am piecing together very cohesive pieces as to what it is that they are indicating they would like to see done. And a new form of ritual, if we don't stick with tradition, is born. More importantly, to make it possible for it to work cohesively, I talked to my coven about timing and feeling and releasing. So there are appropriate, offerings that are made in order to see that this new magic is able to be brought to fruition. And then we set about casting it. And generally speaking, something beautiful is really born from it. I primarily want to make certain that the tradition itself is intact, because literally the more you move around in pagan circles, you really become aware of the fact that a lot of people, and to your credit, Literata, and Grafton?
Yes.
To your credit, I couldn't be more thrilled at how eloquently you spoke of what it is that you do, because eclectic practitioners are often looked down upon. And it's something to be encouraged, because if one steps outside or away from hubris or ego, you literally begin to understand these traditions, though given labels, and those labels are nice, they're all actually talking about the exact same thing. And the further along you get, someone touched on this, I like to refer to it as collective God consciousness, or to seek communion with the one, the true source of the all. When you get into an area like that and you move away from the understanding of the importance of the label and get over a healthy dose of fear that's probably warranted, once that's able to be set aside, some really wonderful things have the ability to be born. And so members within my group are very definitely encouraged to offer what it is that they would like to contribute. And just because I happen to be the priest of my organization does not mean I always want to be the person up doing the talking. I certainly love the idea of turning the floor over to someone and allowing them a night to express what it is that they have excitedly been learning in their own personal practice. And that definitely within my group is something that is most certainly encouraged, continuing to practice on their own and to grow personally as they learn the covenant's traditions, if that makes any sense. And I just went blah, blah, blah too long. Somebody else.
In our tradition, Nematon, so the Nematon of the Ways is that it's interspiritual. We strive, as Liturgist talked about, these right relationships. So when we approach the idea of ritual practice, it's a balance between syncretism, making everything together into one, and also a synthesis of combining everything into something that's new. So a lot of times it's a balance between boiling everything down into its base components. Like, we all know we're going to do something that looks like an offering in the ritual, so let's do that. And then also synthesis, like, well, we all do the offering in different ways, so let's try and find a common ground between all those things. So it's a balance between those two things, because if you boil everything down, it gets all really mushy and doesn't really have any, value to it. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's just porridge, and that doesn't really help. So for us, we chose, so our patron deity is Nematona, which is an ancient Celtic deity that there's very little known about her, except that she's the deity of sacred worship and sacred spaces. So that's pretty much all it is. And so the main, the only really rubric or requirement for our rituals is that at some point Nematona is invoked to be the goddess of the sacred space that's being erected. So beyond that, we've done a couple different things. We've either had, if there's someone who really wants to, they can take a ritual and invoke Nematona and then lead it entirely in their tradition, their style. Or we have a more not synthetic, a more communal approach to it, as you were describing, where we kind of put everything together and make it work. So it just depends on what's right for the time.
I'd like to show and not tell. I have a personal practice as well as the covenant practice, and I encourage people to continue to develop their own daily practice as witches. And I'd like to share the briefest part of that with you right now. So if you would like to do that, please sit comfortably, rest comfortably, however's good for you. Feel your body in space. If it's comfortable for you, close your eyes. And become aware of your breath and your attention, your awareness of yourself. Feel that within you. Feel it connect to your seat or your feet or whatever is touching what's below you. And then send your awareness out into roots, down through your chair, through the floor, through the ground. Send those roots down into the earth. Send down along them anything you no longer need. Take a breath in, breathe out, and throw down anything you no longer need. The earth is composting that. She's big and beautiful. Draw up instead what does feed you. When that comes up to your center, let your awareness rise until you have branches coming up out of your physical body, through this space, through what rose above you, up until the clouds are blowing through your branches. Lift your prayers, your hopes, your dreams, your wishes up among your branches. Lift them up to what is transcendent. And as they blow away, as they are lit with the light of the stars, draw down the light and the breath that you need. Breathe deeply into yourself and return your awareness to your physical form. Feel your outline, fingers, toes, and open your eyes if you close them. That's grounding and centering. That's the most basic practice that there is in our tradition.
Thank you for sharing that. Any of my ADF people who are in the audience or listening will be like, oh, that was a 2 hours meditation. So I love hearing about the commonalities between practices.
Grafton, would you talk about how people find us? do the talking bit.
I'm not sure we have a defined way that people find us. We have come together as a group through a variety of paths, through social media, through random encounters in public rituals, both here locally and in other places and times and cities.
If you do want to find us, our website is griffinsmoon.org, and we help lead rituals, open Sabbath rituals on a rotating schedule at the Magical Druid. Support your local shop because it functions as a community center. Thank you. Excuse the interruption.
I'm sure we can get Michael to throw those up in everyone's in the description. Yes.
And then we have a collaborative process, much like other folks have described, for building group ritual, as well as incorporating common threads of tradition that we're building over time.
So we've done all of the nice introduction, easy questions. So now I want to kind of move us into some of the meaty theological questions. So the first one I'm going to ask is, what happens when we die? And you can speak from your personal beliefs, or if, shockingly, anyone has stated beliefs within their tradition, feel free to speak to those too, but I know as pagans a lot of times we don't have that. So Grafton, I'll start with you.
So, for my personal belief, my personal practice, the living form that we are is a connection between immanent and ascendant powers, and we are just a point where those two come together and form this, which is me. And when I cease to exist in this form, that energy returns to those realms, which are effectively one realm in 2 parts. So there is no death for me. There's just a change in how my energy flows through this existence which we have.
If I may, I will talk to you in this in 2 ways. In Asatru, there's a lot of, there are some beliefs about what happens to people after they die. There's the concept of hell or Helheim. There's also the idea of going to Asgard and hanging out with Odin's Hall, or hanging out with any of the other halls that deities have. What's difficult for those beliefs is 2 things. One is that, unfortunately, a lot of the information we have about them comes from heavily Christianized sources, which I don't want to attack Christian people for that. It's just the nature of what it was like at the time. That's what they did. That's the thing. So it's difficult to parse exactly what people of the era believed because it's being filtered. So that's a challenge. So that's what the text would have you say. On my side of the equation, I ascribe in some ways to that, and I also feel things like reincarnation are valid beliefs to have. But for me, one of the things that led me to paganism was that I got very sick of my own upbringing in Roman Catholicism, where everyone seemed to be really focused on what happened after you died, and no one cared about what you were doing while you were living, except how it would affect what happened after you died. So, I'm in some ways doing Roman Catholicism a disservice, and I don't want to disregard the long history of public service that Catholicism has. But what I will say is that a large chunk of the doctrine of Catholicism and Christianity is concerned with how to get into heaven. That's a large chunk of it. And that's not something you can get away with and you can ignore. So for me, I like paganism, I love paganism because I don't have to worry about that. I can really just focus on living the best life that I can, and it's probably all going to work out.
Yeah, for me, so I practice within a Hellenic tradition within ADF, generally speaking. And I tend to take more of an Orphic view of things, where one of the common phrases is, I am a child of earth and starry heaven. I have thirst, let me drink. Go to the left of the house of Hades and you will find the fields of blah, blah, blah. And it keeps going. And so it's this idea that after you die, if you've done the rites in your life, if you've had this relationship with deity in your life, then you're primed with the knowledge, which isn't to say that people who are not cannot go that route, but rather you've studied the material before you're taking the test, right? So you go into this afterlife with like a little bit of extra knowledge, and you know where to go, and that allows you to choose where you go a little bit better. Whether you drink from the well of memory and decide that you're, like, you personally decide, I'm going to reincarnate, and you allow your soul to come back forth. Or you can drink from the well of forgetfulness, and you can choose to remain in the Elysian fields or wherever else, whatever other places there are in the afterlife. With this idea that there's these rivers in the underworld that connect everything, and so when we have died, we can choose where we go. And when we are speaking to those who have died, the rivers connect us to all paths. So that's kind of where I fall on that. We have our first question that came in from folks out in virtual land. Hi, virtual land people. So I'm going to preface it because I actually have a question that's similar on my list here. So our question is partially about people who want to join and the perception of our various traditions. So the question that I have are, what are your thoughts on gendering of deity and gendering of people within your tradition? And how do you feel about deities that may not be male or female? And if you have someone who comes to your group who is trans or non-binary, kind of twofold. What will their perception likely be, do you think? And how do you interact with that seeker?
If I may,
Yeah.
I have to admit I was cheating. I saw the question, and I really wanted to answer it because I feel like I come from a tradition that probably has some of the most aggressively male of deities, and I think that for us it's true, the gendering of deities is something that's inherent to those deities. Thor is not, but also Thor has a myth where he dresses up as a bride to go get his hammer back. So there's a lot of room there. I think that it's gendering deities is something that's an asset to polytheism, because then we can approach deity in a way that reflects who we are as human beings. It can be difficult to approach a formless deific Godhead because we're not formless, we have a form. So that's that part. On the other part of your question, and then someone gets to what you were talking about with the person from a gypsy background, there's no need to tell someone who is gender non-conforming of any variation of that they can't worship a particular deity because it doesn't match. Like that's not something we need to do. To do that is bringing too much baggage into it. There's a concept that comes up a lot for us it's true, because we often fight against white supremacists for our tradition, and so there's the idea of the intolerance of tolerance. We're trying to be as inclusive as possible, which means we have to exclude people who don't want to be inclusive, and that's a challenge because you have to figure out where that line is, how that boundary works, how do you define that boundary? How do you tell people that? And that falls into that question, is that no one in our tradition or in the Nematon is going to say to a trans person or a gender non-binary person that they, can't attend presenting in the way that they want because we're going to honor, Odin or something like that. That's just not what we're going to do, ever.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
That's a really good question, first of all. The Lady Hecate, in her main aspect, is described as having the face of a serpent, a horse, and a lion. The body is nothing whatsoever to describe. There's nothing there that indicates female from the standpoint of what we know to be female. Representationally, myths exist that indicate that they have the ability to transform themselves in a likeness that makes it easy to digest them, because a true visage might scare the shit out of you. The idea that a person would be turned away for being non-binary is really kind of sickening and saddening. I personally have witnessed in public, I was invited to consecrate grounds for a ritual, and I watched a priestess in her faith as Asatru be shunned by other priests and priestesses, and I watched individuals be told that unfortunately our tradition is this way and you will have to deal with the fact that men are men and women are women. And I saw people they literally burst into tears or turned red, and it was the first time I've ever seen anything like that. As I indicated earlier, and maybe this was missed, within my tradition, it is understood that the divine masculine and the divine feminine exist in all human beings because we come from men and women. Biology suggests that men have an amount of estrogen that's constantly being produced, just as women have testosterone that's being produced within their system. This is science. If you don't want to take that on science, then it needs to be accepted from basic common sense, from my standpoint, that the union of the sexes is the reason that we literally exist. Having said all of that, the interesting, and I really want to be very careful to be respectful in answering this, so please understand this comes from a place of personal experience. The interesting bit in allowing for individuals to come in and to be interviewed and then to want to welcome them, I think many of the people within my group, the greatest hurdle that they've experienced in trying to allow for transgendered individuals to be a part of the group is removing the focus on the nature of the individual being trans and really focusing on allowing that person to be a person in the group. If the pronouns are necessary, the pronouns are necessary. But we like the idea of being able to treat people as they wish to be treated and to in return to receive the same thing. And that became one of the largest or hardest, I think, experiences we've had, but so well worth it because personally I grew. And in all honesty, where I might have had notions as to what it might be like for an individual who feels that they are born in a different or in the wrong body, I grew and I learned from the experience of that individual wanting their transness to be of importance to individuals as well as their feeling or their need to be accepted. But still primarily, I think within a cohesive group, it has to be understand we are all people who are seeking to find communion with one another and to commune with spirit, and that's primarily the focus. So it's a very delicate balance of meeting individual needs as well as meeting the needs of being able to treat individuals as literal individuals and that not being lost. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's important to the individual, the pronouns and the labeling, but as long as the love is actually presented and the respect is there, the idea, and I hope this is true for all of our groups, the idea would be that openness and welcome hearts are then present for nurturing relationships to begin to develop. And at the end of the day, our groups or our organizations, they do become like families. They do become like families, and families irritate each other. Families sometimes clumsily say certain things, and then you're navigating personality conflicts. As long as there's a willingness to learn from those experiences, your group remains cohesive. Within my organization, Gary and I spend an incredible amount of time navigating personalities. It's one of the reasons why we've lasted as long as we do. And it's really become a major sticking point that I've learned. Some organizations that may not have lasted long did not maintain that as a focus. Priests and priestesses can sometimes become mothers and fathers. That is not the goal, but that sometimes is how we're looked at. And so that nurturing environment, as long as that's present, I at least believe it's possible to incorporate all individuals. If you think, and I'm not making a joke about being trans, but if you believe you're a donkey, who am I to tell you you are not a donkey? If it's important to you that you practice a magical thing with an elephant, and then you believe that you're a donkey, if that's what it is that you wish to do, I don't feel I have the right to stand in the way of that. If you're looking for communion with a group of individuals who are willing to be open to that, I think that a lot actually are. It's just trying to find the right ones that will include you.
So there's a follow-up question that came up out of this, which is, if it's an asset for us to identify ourselves with gendered deities as cis people, then what benefit is there for trans folks or non-binary folks to identify with non-gendered deities? And I'll answer this one. I'm calling on me. So I like to call on the gods, goddesses, and the godin, with the godin being their own separate category of these are our gender non-conforming, non-binary deities. And within our grove, we have, so we're 3 Cranes Grove, and Garnis Crane is like our mascot, kind of. And there's pretty good consensus that Garnis is gender fluid. He, when he presents to me, is normally male. Presents to others as female, presents to others as and so there's this, I think there is value if a deity can present as non-binary to allow that to happen, which is not to say that Thor is non-binary, because I'm pretty sure he's not. There's a comment on here for you that Norse gods are 10% meat and 90% testosterone.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
So I'm not saying we should force deities into gendered boxes the same way we shouldn't force people into gendered boxes, but there is this allowance that they exist. So does anyone else want to add to that?
Griffin's Moon has had trans and non-binary individuals since our founding, and I want to apologize to you because you set the example of giving your pronoun, which establishes the norm that you can't know someone's pronoun just by looking at them, and I should have followed up on that, so I apologize. Mine are she, her, although I'm not Schrodinger's queer, a little gender fluid and bi, pansexual, whatever, so it depends which light you're looking at me, how queer I look. And we're actively trying to include that in our rituals. So we're working to take powerful concepts out of Wiccan liturgy, like the union of cup and sword, or we do cup and wand, like that union, and then re-describe that in different ways. And sometimes it ends up being non-gendered, non-binary. Sometimes we're deliberately subverting it. Sometimes Grafton and I look like we could do the American farmer portrait. Okay, so we're right up there with Uranus and Griffin. I mean, I haven't met all of the forms of Griffin that there are yet. I'm sure Griffin will just invent new ones now that I've said that. So we try to foster that also within within our organization and reflect that in our rituals.
I just want to add that I think that within our tradition or my tradition, though the lady is referred to as the lady, I do not believe in any way, shape, form, or other that she shuns or turns individuals away based off of their transness. That just isn't a thing in this group. Again, it has everything to do with the recognition that a man who would come and would seek to be a part of my group would be presented with the challenge, and I've done this, that you need to spend time cultivating the divine feminine within you. Plain and simple. It's a requirement. And that can be really hard for someone that really identifies with their penis. I'm just calling a spade a spade. The thing though is that if you have not found the right group for yourself, if I present a concept to you that's too much of a hurdle, there ends your year in a day. I'm not going to make you come under heel to do what I tell you to do. This is what we do. This is the requirement. If you want to be able to manifest the appropriate polarities, it becomes a requirement. So that I said that about my group. The unfortunate thing is, and I'm not making any excuses for anything with regards to this, there are unfortunately traditions that really do assign roles to sexual orientation, plain and simple. And the truth is that there's not going to be any changing of that because the established tradition is important to be carried on. But just because that isn't the thing that fits for you does not mean that there aren't groups out there that will not embrace you entirely for who and what it is that you are, and that you may find that you flourish in that environment.
Thank you, Brian. Because I know, as James was saying, that Asatru has the white supremacist problem and Dianics have the gendered problem. So thank you for addressing that.
I'm all about my feminine side, not ashamed of it.
Okay, so another question from our virtual folks. Hey, virtual folks. Is how do we integrate faith with science? And is there any conflict between faith and science, particularly if there's this feeling of superstition within your tradition? I'll throw that out there. Anyone want to answer that first?
I can take a stab at it. Unless, Grafton, I saw you starting.
I was just going to say this is one of the reasons that we focus on praxis rather than faith. Go out and do. And a lot of what is involved in doing is understanding how physicality works, how you work, and that's biology, that's physics, that's chemistry, that's all of that science is part of this world that we live in. And has to be, in some sense, part of the practice that we teach and that we understand.
For me, this is a question that I often wrestle with a lot because I'm a skeptical pagan. I would be the first one to be all on board if you could present me with a couple of studies that showed me that magic is real. I'm all on board with that. Haven't found those yet. And I don't want to denigrate anyone's personal experience at all. The difficulty with that is that those kind of unverifiable personal gnosis experiences does not make science. Science is not based on those things. It's also not to say that the mystical experience isn't important and useful to our lives. Science can tell us that practices like meditation are useful, that they have an effect. Practices like visualization are useful, they also have an effect. Just being in nature and appreciating nature is useful and has an effect. Science can tell us these things. Science can't tell us if the gods exist or if they don't. Science cannot answer that question. So that's a question we get to answer from a more philosophical standpoint, and that's totally okay. That's really okay. Human beings have evolved to be storytellers. We tell ourselves stories about how our lives have gone, how they will go. We tell each other stories about how the world works, about how everything works, about how things don't work. That's who we are as people, as a culture.
I really love this question, and I love this question because I'm a doubting Thomas also. I may have slight scientific approaches to magic, but the truth is, if it's not able to be measured with the five senses in some way, shape, or form, I don't validate it. And having said that, please forgive any what sounds like outlandishness or whatever, but I find that people who have or possess the gift of manifestation are often guided to me. And the reason that they are guided to me is that I possess the gift of manifestation. I have seen magic with my own two eyes, felt it with my hands, done things that cannot be explained, and I've never been alone. If I had taken hallucinogenics, it would be subject to doubt because I took the hallucinogenics. Unfortunately, or I should say fortunately, I have not taken hallucinogenics. What I've studied and I've practiced is achieving altered states to manifest specific things. And I don't like to do parlor tricks, but often in the midst of something where I'm just flinging my hands about, and if I get overly excited, something will end up happening. I have two people here who probably attest to that. What I am really primarily trying to say is that it's really interesting when you are, actually no, this might seem like I'm taking everybody on 270, but I'm not meaning to, because this is kind of really important. Many individuals, I feel that when they practice magic, are disillusioned with the real world and the experience of being a part of this physical world. When you encounter practitioners that are like that, the type of magic that they end up gravitating towards is astral in nature, meaning that they rip holes in the astral, plant seeds over there. It springs to fruition in that realm and then somehow is made manifest over here. It can't be seen, it can't be measured, but in some way it is felt that what was born from the ritual did come to pass. My practice is in literally dealing with the harshness of this reality and dealing with the pain that comes with this reality. My magic occurs here. And there are that experience of being able to share that with other individuals who aren't coming seeking parlor tricks or to see certain things, but then ultimately have that shared experience of being able to say, wow, is amazing. Now, the interesting thing about deity that I wanted to throw in here is that to meet the need of the individual that wants to find out whether or not God is real, or a goddess is real as I put it to them, I tell individuals only the following. At some point in time, a spirit is going to introduce itself to you. I say this to all my members or seekers. She will speak to you and she will do a series of specific things, period. I'm not going to say what she looks like, but I will tell you the following, that eventually all of you are going to describe the exact same person in your own time. And they all do. And I just nod my head like, yep, and I won't say anything else. Now, to prevent me from having planted a seed that causes the imagination to creatively visualize it, I am deliberately, purposefully avoiding the notion of mentioning any kind of description. Do I want them to be aware of the fact that she will introduce herself? Absolutely. Why is that necessary? Because I tell people, Hecate is literally listed as an active goddess. Do not call on her if you don't expect a response. And don't call her for something that's ridiculous, because calling on her should literally not be taken lightly. The fact that she has auspice over Winding Road, or is the patron goddess of that, means that we feel her presence. Some of us hear her at the exact same time, which has been very interesting. And yeah, even the newbies. No one in my group will tell anyone new, brand new, what she looks like, what will appear, but they all describe the same thing. And that's kind of faith affirming. So it meets the needs of the individual that wants to have a measure of science some kind of way. Yes, it is personal gnosis, but is it really actually...
It's more shared gnosis.
And more importantly, is it really actually is it able to simply be indicated as just something occurring within the internal landscape, or is that a way of verifying or proving it's real? I almost think at some point in time she quite literally will end up merging into the world if she wanted to make everybody see her with her own two eyes. It occurs within the landscape with me. Sometimes I see the outline of the physical form. There are occasions when it may literally be full-on manifestation of a form while dreaming. It's never the same thing, but the face and the visage, the clothing, the specifics, it all is presented by every single one of those people. And so that I want them to have that experience, it's really important that I not provide any kind of a description, and that no one else that's already had that visitation says anything at all. We want them to have that, and then we just simply look at them and go, yes.
So you're collecting evidence, which I would argue makes it slightly scientific.
Well, I mean, again, because unfortunately, the closest series of spirits that is near to this world, they are very good at, producing within individuals mental instability and then physical malady. Certain types of practices can literally, in my own estimation, if you're not careful, drive you crazy. So, from that standpoint, I literally want to make certain that individuals understand this is not in that camp or that realm. And yes, I do want to collect evidence, not so much for myself, but to help individuals understand there is more happening under the sun than can be seen with your own two eyes. And you need to open yourself to the possibilities of it. And then I want something to come up and hit them upside the head so it's proven.
So to kind of tie a bow on this, I like to say that magic is science we just don't understand yet. That's my 2-second take on faith and science.
I would disagree, but that's fine.
Okay, so I'm going to jump. We've got about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to ask one more question from here, and for you folks, if you've got a question, think on it, and let's try and answer this next one as briefly as possible while they are thinking on what they might want to ask. So the next one I think that comes up in a lot of theological discussions in a lot of religions is this idea of suffering. Why do bad things happen to good people?
That question is one of the kind of core questions that people ask. In general. What happens after you die? Why do bad things happen? And what are we here for? What's the purpose of our life? Those tend to be the biggest questions that people always ask. And there's differing answers, obviously. And I think what's important in answering those questions is one of the reasons why we study theology. It's why people study theology, because that's one way to answer those questions. For our tradition, suffering is not something that you something you deserve. It's not something that you have merited through your actions, unless, by which to say, it's not because you did something wrong in your childhood that you're now suffering 30 years later. That's not how it works. If you do wrong actions, then you have to suffer the consequences of your actions. That's always true. So that can lead to suffering depending on what you want to do. And you just have to be ready to accept that. But almost all pagan traditions do not ascribe to the concept of a devil or of a adversarial figure of that kind that's constantly making people suffer. That's not something that's in most pagan traditions. It's something that was added later. And it's because most pagan traditions don't necessarily see some suffering as something that should be avoided entirely. Suffering is part of our existence. It's an inescapable part of our existence. And how you deal with that is how you can come to know deity better, and it's how you come to be a better person.
For me, I think a lot of the background question when people ask why do bad things happen is this idea that's still kind of left over if you're pagan of there's this omnipotent God who makes sure that good things happen to everybody. right? And so if this God is omnipotent and omnibenevolent, then why are bad things happening? And from my pagan polytheistic viewpoint is our deities are limited. They cannot be in all places at once. They cannot make decisions about one person when they're on the other side of the world. Like they're not everywhere at once. And I would argue that not all deities care about people. There are hundreds, thousands of deities out there who we don't interact with on a regular basis. And it's not that they are actively against us, they're doing their own thing over in deity land. Like, we're just other creatures who exist in the same place. And it's not necessarily like an adversarial thing, it's just different people, different places. So for me, why bad things happen is sometimes life just sucks. And you can approach the deities that you are close to and ask for help with those things and petition them for blessings and ask them to help you through that dark time. But it is not through your actions or their actions or whatever that there's this existential suffering. You know, if you walk out into the middle street and get hit by a car, that's your action, that's your problem. Like, don't make those decisions. But if it's more of this existential crisis kind of thing, ask for help, but it's not, our deities are limited. They can't always be there.
I'm not sure that I have a good answer to why they're suffering. What I know is that my deities want to be with us, my deities want to help that, and that it's my job as a person here on earth, as you said, you don't want to be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly use, is how I've heard it said in Christian circles.
Yep.
Yeah, whatever the ultimate cause of suffering is, it's my job to try and make it less where I can. And I agree wholeheartedly with Jan that as far as I can tell, there seems to be something about there's existence, and physical existence involves entropy, and therefore we break down, we get old, we die. And because we love, we experience that with suffering. I will not surrender my love in order to have no suffering. Instead, I will use love to make meaning out of suffering and beyond suffering and ameliorate it until love makes life. And love makes new life, and love makes life worth living even when it sucks sometimes.
All right, are there any questions? We've got about 10 more minutes.
I actually wanted to contribute something to that, make a question. What I wanted to say is I go to a prison and I listen to a lot of women who have experienced sexual assault. And some of them have been raped, some of them have experienced domestic violence in ways I don't think, it's unfathomable. Now what's really interesting to me is that I, being a man, regardless of whether or not I'm gay, am in a position where I am accepted by those women and they listen to me. And the main reason that they listen to me is that my suffering in life has been able to be used as not anecdotal evidence, if you will, or like I draw on my history to explain transformation in the usage of the craft. The thing about pain and suffering, I feel it's absolutely necessary to not only suffer and survive that suffering, but to transition it into forms of wisdom. Because the truth is, if we are truly healers or teachers or persons that are meant to provide guidance to individuals, no one wants to listen to guidance or words of wisdom from an individual that does not know pain or hasn't experienced or walked a mile in the shoes of another individual. If someone is like a Pollyanna and the Pollyanna has never like suffered a day in her life and everything's been picture perfect, that individual has a hard time relating to other individuals who are not having that as a common experience. Suffering is often in the form of cycles, and what you will find when it comes to the practice of magic is that understanding pattern recognition is very definitely a thing in it. And when you identify patterns and you're able to break those cycles, you do begin to come to the understanding that some of this sometimes looks like lessons. And the truth is, you are only going to really find out how powerful you really are and how strong you really are if you learn to master yourself. If you cannot master yourself, you cannot master unseen forces. It's plain and simple. And that's why suffering is necessary.
Are there any questions? Yeah.
Within paganism, there isn't necessarily a standard guideline of how it's supposed to go, as we have a panel. People tend to say, because we don't have a book that says A through B you need to do, or you're a bad person. Where does morality come into your traditions? Where do you learn what is ethical and what is not? What makes it right for you and your traditions?
Who would you like to answer?
Any of you?
I think I'll take that one, mainly because I hear a lot from many sources that paganism is a tradition, or it as a whole is orthopractic and not orthodoxic. Orthopractic means right action, and orthodoxy means right belief. Whenever I hear that, I tend to disagree, because I think, and this is again gets back to why we study theology, I think that if you'll talk to any pagan, you will find similar beliefs from all pagans. So there are right beliefs for pagans. We generally believe in the sacredness of nature and the earth around us. We generally believe that people have 3 or more distinct kind of bodies. You have a physical, a mental, and a divine body. We generally believe in the 2 powers, up and above. We generally believe these things. Most pagans have a set of shared beliefs, whether or not they admit to it or not. So that's one place where you can go to get morality and ethics. But most of the time, those shared beliefs don't give morality and ethics. Believing in the 2 powers, or believing in that connection, doesn't really tell you how to live your life. Not really. So that's where it's helpful to be an intellectual pagan, because then you can study ethics on the side, as it were. If you're just gonna, how can I put this? If you're gonna be, if you're going to leave a tradition you were born in, like Christianity or Catholicism or Judaism or whatever, and go to paganism, you shouldn't just swap out one book for another, maybe not. I don't know, that might not be the best idea. Morality and ethics is a huge part of human experience, and it's been debated constantly. So there's many different ways to get your ethics.
Since we believe that we're in relationship with everything, we get a lot of our ethics from looking at the consequences of action or inaction to those relationships. And it's very, very simple that if I do something that makes the world a worse place, then I have to live in the world that I've made the worst place. And that's a dumb idea. Because figuring out the details is the hard part, as always.
Yeah, within ADF, we have 9 virtues, which are, it's interesting because you have to understand them, but you don't have to believe them, is kind of how it's worded. But for me, one of those is hospitality, which I think is like the prime virtue of everything that we do, because it's all about this relationship with everything and everyone around you, and being in that right relationship. So I think I can sum up what all 3 of us just said by right relationships good, and we don't need a book to tell us how to be good people, right? Okay, so we have about 5 more minutes, so I'm just going to kind of wrap us up here. I didn't even get to half my questions. You guys are great.
Means we can do it again.
I over-prepared. If we want to do it again, we can do it again with more of the difficult ones. So thank you all for agreeing to be a panelist. I know that Michael, hooray for Michael, our tech person, who's running our video feed, is going to get the archived video up. It will be archived on Facebook. Are you putting it on our YouTube as well?
I will, yeah.
Okay, so if you guys want to go back and like rewatch it, or for anyone who happens across this archive, you can find it other places. I'm speaking from the future. So it'll be archived other places. We'll make sure that everyone gets their information to Michael, and he will get our information on this event page, so that if people want to contact us, they've got the ability to do that. And then just one, let's see, let me check my notes. Hang on. Okay, more questions. Okay. And then the last thing on here is we like to say in our grove that ritual is free, but the space is not. So same thing applies to all the other stuff we do, where we put on events for our community. And if you are able, we ask for donations. If you are not, we enjoyed your presence. Okay, it was a gift for us. So that's all I've got, and we're gonna wrap up because we have to clean up our tables and chairs and stuff and give Seth back this lovely location. Okay, so thank you all.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yay.